This week on The Record, all eyes on the Missouri State House, where lawmakers approach a Friday deadline to pass new bills to Governor Parson's desk. A live report from Rudi Keller with the Missouri Independent on the latest developments around crime, police, sports betting, and gender-affirming care for trans patients. Plus, bracing at the border. Pandemic emergency barriers come down at midnight under Title 42. Could a divided Congress find solutions to inflation hidden in immigration reform? We hear from Congresswoman Cori Bush, and Senator Josh Hawley is on the record. Plus, Special Agent in Charge at the DEA, Mike Davis, is on the record with updates on the federal government's crackdown on deadly drugs smuggled across the southern border. And with St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner on her way out, what will it take to rebuild the office in her wake? Her predecessor is on the record. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. The Missouri House and Senate wrap up and go home in just about 27 hours at their deadline. And as of right now, control of the St. Louis Police Department remains in the hands of the mayor and city voters. Rudi Keller joins us live at the top of our program from Jefferson City, where he covers the legislature for the Missouri Independent. Rudi, influential Republican senators are writing op-eds arguing this week against taking the police department out of the mayor's hands. I want to read you an excerpt from Senator Cindy O'Laughlin, who said, quote, "I think the new police chief needs a chance to make the system work before we intervene," and, quote, "inserting Jefferson City politics into the control of their police force is not a next step." How would you describe her influence to our audience in the Senate, and is that a sign this push is dead?
Senator O'Laughlin is the majority leader. Best description is she's a traffic cop on the Senate floor. She decides what comes up, who moves ahead, who stops. And the push for this bill, all the momentum behind it was related to the effort to oust Kim Gardner as circuit attorney. And now that she has decided to resign effective June 1st, that took all of the impetus behind this bill. There have been a couple of attempts to revive it, but the local control was just granted to the police department about 10 years ago. So whether that has completely been fully developed as an idea, has it been given a full opportunity to work? Senator O'Laughlin clearly thinks no. So I think that issue is gone for the year.
It looks like it's gone. Okay, that's some developing news. Certainly something that seemed apparent or imminent from that op-ed, and you put a finer point on it for us. I want to move on to another issue a lot of our audience is watching carefully. The president of the St. Louis Cardinals, Bill DeWitt III, said just recently that he would take the fight for legal sports betting to the ballot in 2024 if the Senate doesn't legalize it now. Where does that plan stand at this hour as we approach this deadline? And is there any sign you can see that the Cardinals' pitch broke through that Senate logjam?
Well, that pitch is about as effective as Cardinal pitching on the field has been this year. It didn't really change anything. There is rumor that there will be one last stab at it, perhaps this evening in the Missouri Senate, which is the roadblock. It's been passed a couple of times in the Missouri House. There's a senator from Warrensburg who is insistent that video lottery terminals be part of this plan. Senator Denny Hoskins of Warrensburg argues that video lottery terminals would generate far more for education than sports wagering will. But sports wagering is obviously the thing that has got everybody's imagination. It's what you see in commercials on St. Louis television. Come on over to Illinois where you can bet on the Cardinals. During the Chiefs-Bengals game in the playoffs, there were thousands of people in the stadium blocked from making bets over in Kansas City. So and every state on our border, save one, has already legalized sports wagering. So it seems like we should do it, but it's not happening in the Assembly unless this last gasp effort comes through.
Is the thinking that one cannot get through without the other, that video lottery terminals and sports betting are intrinsically linked together, or is there a standalone bill that could still pass?
Bills that could still pass. It's who is linking them and their willingness to get in the way of a bill that does not. And Senator Hoskins has shown that he is willing to get in front of and any bill that does not provide for both.
One of the more controversial political and cultural issues that affects the medical community was getting a lot of attention this legislative session, throughout most of it. Just last month, at the end of last month, Governor Mark Parson threatened to interrupt lawmakers' summer schedule, their summer break, call them back into special session if they didn't regulate and restrict sports or medical care for trans minors. Was that prompt from Governor Parson sign that Republicans weren't entirely unified or aligned on this issue and needed an extra spark? Or how would you just describe the supermajority's direction or motivation on these issues?
Well, the House was willing to go as far as any conservative wants to go in Missouri, with a complete ban on these treatments for minors, no allowance for continuation of treatments that are already underway, and a complete ban on the participation in sports based on the gender that you identify with. But the bills that have passed have, for treatment, there's a 4-year moratorium and an allowance for treatments to continue if they are if they're already underway. And this was worked out in the Senate over hours and days of debate in the Senate, and it was clear that nothing stricter than that could pass. So the House took up and passed the Senate version without changing even as so much as where a comma is. And so that bill is on the governor's desk. Same on the ban on participation in sports. That bill is headed to the governor's desk. The governor is a former legislator. I think that he realizes what is realistic, and so he will accept that and not call a special session, would be my forecast.
And it sounds like a safe bet, given his public statements. He will sign it. Rudi Keller and his colleagues at the Missouri Independent doing a lot of good shoe leather reporting, providing context, and you can see more of their reporting up on their website online. Rudi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark.
We turn now to the dilemma at the southern border. Politics has largely paralyzed Congress from enacting meaningful or permanent immigration reform. Temporary policies to turn away asylum seekers under Title 42 expire tonight at midnight. Joining us live on the record is the special agent in charge at the DEA in the St. Louis division, Mike Davis. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
I want to take a look at some numbers recently provided by the DEA. The agency just announced staggering results in cracking down on the drug cartels. These two Jalisco and Sinaloa drug cartels based in Mexico have been distributing deadly fentanyl pills throughout the country. Just recently, the St. Louis division alone, which is parts of Kansas, Missouri, and southern Illinois,
Yes.
reported 29 investigations in this Operation Last Mile. We'll get into that in a minute.
Yes.
72 arrests, seizing more than 1.3 million fentanyl pills, 100 pounds of fentanyl powder, more than 200 pounds of meth, and 405 guns, almost $500,000 in assets. That's a lot of drugs. How do you know where it came from?
Okay. Well, so Operation Last Mile, it was an enforcement operation conducted by the 23 domestic field divisions of DEA. And it targeted the end of the distribution chain. And that's going to be your stash house operators, your transportation coordinators, and your regional and local distributors. And typically what happens is once the drugs enter into the United States, most of them, of course, coming from our southwest border, it comes into areas like Los Angeles, San Diego, and Phoenix.
And you've worked in LA before.
I did work in LA for 4.5 years prior to arriving here in St. Louis about a year ago.
So you're not just seeing things arrive on your doorstep, you're seeing them cross the border. You've seen that over the course of your career.
Absolutely. I've actually been to the ports of entry in San Isidro and Otay Mesa. Absolutely.
According to a 2018 report from the U.S. Sentencing Commission, more than 4 in 5 fentanyl-related arrests in this country are American citizens. It seems clear this isn't merely a problem with foreign nationals, is it?
No, not just foreign nationals, but because yes, some of them may be how the drugs are actually getting here, but these are local distributors that are gang members and local distributors that are distributing this poison and putting it actually on our streets, and which is causing, of course, overdose deaths.
And these are synthetic drugs that are cooked up in a lab. So, I understand that there's a belief that a lot of the chemicals originate in China.
Yes.
Do we know that for sure?
Yes.
And nowhere else, or other places too?
Well, what we do know is and also India. There's been cases where we've actually tracked it to India.
How much of this problem originates at the southern border compared to other ports of entry flying over from overseas? How much of it starts at the southern border crossing?
Unfortunately, it's quite a bit that's actually coming into the United States from the southern border. And like I said, once it gets here, they go into stash houses throughout the southern border, cities like Los Angeles, San Diego, and Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And these stash house operators, these are individuals that are hired by the cartels to oversee that stash house. These are bulk quantities of all different types of drugs, but mainly synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Mm-hmm. At some point during the distribution process, transportation coordinators will hire commercial tractor trailer drivers or private individuals to transport these drugs on our interstate system, and these drugs head eastbound to different hubs throughout the United States, including Kansas City and St. Louis, here in St. Louis, right here in the heartland. Once it arrives here, then it's on the regional and the local drug distributors to actually distribute it to ultimately users.
I wonder if you could describe the danger and the duty that officers in your agency face and perform. A lot of people might think about the DEA and think, oh, I've seen Breaking Bad, or I've seen The Wire, or they'll think of some TV show they saw. But when I read through the press reports and the releases recently, there's new information from the DEA that you're looking at TikTok and Facebook and WhatsApp and,
yes,
and different social media sites. What's the connection? Are there agents that are white collar in essence that are looking through cyber information to try and trace down where these drugs are coming from? How does that work?
Absolutely. The drug cartels are actually using social media to facilitate the distribution of the drugs that are hitting our streets.
What would that look like if I saw it on my feed? Or how does it present to the public?
Okay, so for instance, when I was in Los Angeles, for instance, there was a site. It was called Offer Up. I could type in blue shorts or a blue dress, and as soon as you type in blue, then all type of basically ads would pop up.
Targeted
offering
ads.
Absolutely,
including for drugs.
For drugs, because when I say blue, it's because of the blue oxycodone 30 milligram pill, and that is what we see here the most here in St. Louis is those blue pills, and you have drug distributors that will bring it directly to your front door, and unfortunately, it's affecting our young adults, our teenagers.
Mail order fentanyl.
Mail order fentanyl.
Okay, one of the things we like to do on the record is to put things in context and give some numbers, some measure of just how tragic and how harmful this poison, you called it, how harmful it really is. Data from the CDC, and I think we have a graphic here, it shows a drastic spike in fentanyl overdose deaths starting sometime in 2015 or 2016, continuing unabated on an upward climb until now. Meth rose at a similar pace, but at a much lower overall level. Is there just more supply? Is there more demand? What's driving this?
It's a little bit of both, unfortunately. The supply has gone up, and we know when the supply is going up because that's when we pay the lowest amount for the drugs. When we're doing our undercover operations and we're going out there and we're buying drugs,
the price goes down. That means there's more out there.
The price right now is very low. And of course, unfortunately, there is a large demand here in the United States, and Missouri included. So, that's what we're seeing right now. And
yeah, we hear a lot of political rhetoric around topics like these. I wonder if you can provide some important facts and context around how drugs get here to the heartland from the southern border. We know that more than 2.7 migrants crossed the U.S. southern border last year, but I imagine not all of them carrying a little baggie of powder with them. Most of them probably weren't. What's the scope? How many of the people crossing the border are doing so with intent to do the cartel's bidding?
Well, what I can say is that I don't believe that every person that's crossing the border is, of course, bringing in drugs, and I definitely don't see that. But there are some. There are many, unfortunately, and they're bringing in these drugs into the United States, and it's hitting our interstate system, and of course, eventually going directly to drug distributors at the regional and local level.
I suppose a challenge for the DEA is filtering out and identifying the sources.
Yes, that every case that we open here in St. Louis and throughout DEA nationwide, the overall intent is to work it back to the cartel responsible for producing it.
There was El Chapo, there was his sons, the Chapitos,
Yes.
who were indicted
Recently,
not
yes.
arrested yet. But there's a lot of that going on. All right, so what's the most helpful thing right now that, just on a practical standpoint, that the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol could do, the Congress could do? What's a specific targeted thing they could do to make the DEA's job easier and stop these drugs from reaching Americans?
Well, of course, more money for our enforcement operations. That's always key.
So defunding the police is off the table. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
But what can they do proactively that goes beyond just throwing? Is there a specific policy, or is there something they can do to help identify beyond just funding?
Well, I would say, besides funding, I would say definitely put more pressure on the social media platforms, Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok. Because unfortunately, a lot of our kids are actually receiving ordering their drugs up from those platforms. And you no longer have to go to the neighborhood, the bad neighborhood to get your drugs. You order up, and next thing you know, a dealer is there at your front door.
Well, it's not every day we get a DEA special agent in charge on the record, but we're very glad to have you. Thank you for providing some important context about something that we know is plaguing a lot of American families.
Thank you.
All right, tonight at midnight, the pandemic-era restrictions at the southern border end as Title 42 expires. President Biden's administration says it will implement new, tougher restrictions to apply for and receive asylum in place of Title 42, but Congress hasn't taken significant immigration reform action in 4 decades. Congresswoman Cori Bush was asked about the upcoming changes at the border during a press conference in St. Louis on Monday.
We care about the dignity and the humanity of each and every person, regardless of where they are from, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And they deserve dignity. They deserve asylum if they need it. They deserve the status that is needed. They deserve the protections, and they deserve the resources, and they deserve to be safe.
While Congresswoman Bush wants to see migrants offered asylum, quote, if they need it, the Biden administration says it will make it harder for migrants to get approved for that asylum in the replacement of this Title 42 policy. However, the shock of the pandemic severely limited global travel and crimped immigration overall, far just beyond the U.S. and far beyond just those seeking asylum. When the U.S. put Title 42 in place back in 2020 and 2021, we saw dramatic drop-offs in permanent and temporary visas for migrant workers as well. We've also seen record high inflation, while many economists, including those at the Federal Reserve, say they need to see more workers fill the open jobs before we start to see interest rates ease a bit. Senator Josh Hawley is now on the record. Right now, we have more open jobs in this country than unemployed workers. It's been true since May of 2021. Isn't there an obvious solution here if Congress can finally get its act together on immigration reform?
Oh, now if you're talking about increasing the labor supply, which I think is what you're driving at, we need to have more workers in this country for these jobs. I have to say I respectfully disagree. I mean, my view is we ought to be raising wages. I like the wage growth. I want to see workers in this country, Americans who are born here, and legal immigrants. I want to see their wages go up. So I don't want to flood the country with cheap labor. And what we've seen with illegal immigration, remember, the illegal immigrants who come over, if they get employed, they're often treated at subpar wages. They're paid under the table. Why? Well, because they're illegal. We've seen this with the kids. 350,000 children smuggled here under Joe Biden because of his policies, and now they're being forced into child labor. Many of them aren't paid at all. That is wrong. It is morally wrong. It's also terrible for American workers. So I want to see American workers have their jobs protected. I want to see their wages be strong and continue to rise. And I don't think we need a massive influx of cheap labor.
Of course, people that study migration policy and labor policy look at those, child labor or undocumented workers who sometimes do accept sub-minimum wages, do so because they have to live in the shadows because they were forced into an illegal immigration process. If there was a legal process for them to cross the border, go through that process and get here on some sort of a temporary visa, work visa, perhaps they wouldn't be subjected to that. But I want to quote from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, who said many immigrant workers here on visas left to go home to their countries of origin during the pandemic. And Jerome Powell said, quote, in the labor market, demand for workers far exceeds the supply of available workers. I hear what you're saying about the economy, but we need more goods to cool inflation. We need more people producing goods to cool inflation. Who works those jobs? Often it's immigrants who are willing to work for those lower wages. So I'm not sure, can't you cool inflation if you have more production of goods?
No, we need blue collar wages to go up. Look at the wage growth in the last just few decades, Mark. Look who has captured all of it. Has it been the workers? Look at the productivity growth, I should say. Who's captured all of it? Has it been the workers? No, it's been the corporations. Corporate profits have gone through the ceiling. The profits of the corporate managers have gone through the ceiling. The profits of the wages for blue-collar workers barely grown at all in decades. And under this president, it's declined. I mean, 2.5 years of declines in real wages for blue-collar workers. Now, we want their wages to go up. I don't want more cheap labor. I want to take issue with something you said, though, just a second ago in your setup. You said people are forced to cross the border illegally. No, they're not. No, that's a choice. Now, listen, they're frequently lied to by the cartels. The cartels control the border on the southern side. So they lie to make a profit. They say that we're going to help you find a job, da-da-da. They don't. They sell these people into slavery. But I reject the premise that they're somehow forced into illegal immigration. We have a legal immigration system. It's actually quite robust in terms of the number of people annually it allows into the country. We need to be telling folks who want to come here, hey, great, go get in line like everybody else who has come here legally. And we need to say to the cartels, we're going to stop your criminal enterprises that is flooding our streets with crime and flooding our schools with drugs.
But forced could have been a clumsy verb there. Perhaps a better way to say that is the stuck between a rock and a hard place. One last point is from economists. They take issue with how you're framing this as a choice between low wages and cheap labor and real wages. Inflation cheapens how far our dollar can go anyways. I'm going to read you a quick quote and get your reaction from two professors who study this. Quote, to achieve higher real wages while reducing inflation and encouraging employment, the U.S. must either increase labor force participation and expand training, or increase the pool of workers available through the admission of foreign workers. Which is it? Which would you rather have?
The first. We'd rather see the labor force participation rate. That means the number of men and women who are working. And what we've seen in this country for the last 30, 40 years is more and more men, especially actually, who are able-bodied, choose not even to look for a job. They don't work at all. We need those people we need those men especially to get off of the sidelines and get back to work. But part of that, Mark, is we need good paying jobs in this country that you can support a family on. And we've given away too many of those jobs. They've gone to places like China. And we're not going to be helped. This problem is not going to be helped by increasing the supply of cheap labor in this country. Now, I would just say immigrants who come into the country legally, they're not cheap labor in the sense that they're protected by our laws. They're protected by our labor standards. And we, of course, can set the number every year. But illegal immigration and the smuggling that goes with that is a supply of cheap labor that I've got serious issues with. And I think overall, we want to see real wages, and especially blue-collar wages, go up. And I'm not interested in providing these global corporations with a huge supply of cheap labor. That's what they want, no doubt, but I'm not interested in it.
All right, Senator, thanks for your time.
Hey, you bet.
If you were wondering, wait a minute, didn't we just see Senator Hawley on this program last week? Yes, you did. We've tried to invite Senator Eric Schmitt, the newest Missouri senator here, and we hope to have him perhaps in the weeks to come. Also, Senator Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, regular guests here on our program. We're always glad to have them join us when they can and their busy schedules from the U.S. Senate. All right, shifting gears now to the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office. Just 1 week ago today, St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner abruptly announced that she would resign her office under pressure from the mayor, the attorney general, and the public. In a short speech to her staff inside her office, Gardner said if she had not stepped aside, Jefferson City was poised to impose a special prosecutor presiding over her, someone that would presumably strip her position of its independence and perhaps the voters in the city of their voice and control over who sits in that chair and steers the policies of that office. We turn now to the prosecutor who preceded Kim Gardner in that job. Jennifer Joyce is on the record. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Knowing what you know today, with the benefit of hindsight looking back, do you regret not running for office in 2016?
No, I don't. I had served 4 terms, 16 years, and I felt like I had done as much as I could, and I was ready to try to do some other things with my life.
When St. Louis voters chose Kim Gardner, is it fair to say they were choosing to go in a direction different than the one you had led under that office?
Well, I think so. Obviously, anybody other than me is going to be different. And I think Kim had some great ideas that she talked about in her campaign. She obviously was Black. I am not Black. And I think that there was a real desire on the part of the people in the city of St. Louis to elect this woman who had great ideas and could represent a portion of the city that had never had that office before, had never seen their representation in the circuit attorney's office at that top level.
A lot of the people that work in that office, that worked in that office under you, I imagine those are many of the same people. Of course, many have left. I imagine you're still in touch with some of them. What's your best perception or understanding of what went wrong?
Well, I was not there, so I just know from what people have told me, and obviously I care very deeply about the office, so I have paid attention to it. And I think that one of the first things that happened was the management structure that we had in place there was removed. And a lot of the oversight of how things were going on in the office. There's a lot of meticulous detail involved in running the prosecutor's office. And I'm not sure that happened as much as it did under me, because that layer of management to make sure that everything was happening as it should was gone.
Kim Gardner said in a speech to her supporters just a few days before she stepped down that it was the police department running the show, and that they would come in, tell prosecutors when to charge, what to charge, who to charge, what to charge them with, you name it. Evaluate the truth or substance of that statement.
That's just not a true statement. As anybody who worked in the office knows, we statistically issued probably 50% of the cases that the police brought to us, and that's a statistic known as an issue rate, which means the police bring a bunch of cases. It's the job of the prosecutor as an attorney to review those cases and select the ones that are of a level of evidence and that a law has been violated and we have the evidence to prove it. And so we would statistically only issue about 50% of the cases that the police brought to us year after year after year. And it wasn't just me. Going back to Joyce Hayes and George Peach and so on, looking at those statistics, that issue rate stayed pretty constant. So I say, far from the police coming in and telling us what to do, it was a source of frustration at times for the police that we saw things differently than them. We had a different role than they did. And it was our job as the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system to determine whether or not a case should be prosecuted.
And there's a natural tension between prosecutors and police in any jurisdiction, sometimes
Right.
less than others. But there is this chance for a reset. Kim Gardner really wanted to reform police. That was a part of her stated goals, stated mission. There's a new transition happening. Just this last week, Mayor Tashara Jones told KMOX Radio she wants Governor Mike Parson to appoint somebody as a caretaker in an interim role, not a candidate, who would have continuity through the next 4 years, including this first next year or two before the election in 2024. How should the public think about that, the difference between somebody who's just there to be that caretaker or somebody who actually could be there and stay long term? Is there value in continuity?
Well, I agree with her that the person who goes in initially with the appointment should not necessarily be the person that has that office after the next election. I wouldn't call him a caretaker. I would call him a contractor, because what you're doing is bringing somebody in to basically rebuild that office. And we don't know what exactly the situation is there. Obviously, that's going to have to happen first. There's going to have to be a triage process. But that person is going to have to really do some heavy lifting of building that office back to where it's functioning. And you can't do that job while you're running for office at the same time.
If Governor
Both
Mike
of them
Parson calls, are you
full-time
picking up the
jobs.
phone?
Am I what?
If Governor Mike Parson calls, are you picking up the phone?
Sure, I'm happy to share my thoughts on this with him and anybody.
To
But
take an
if you
appointment
mean,
or
am I
just to
taking
advise?
No, I would not take the appointment. I actually have my own consulting practice now, and as you can see from my the words under my screen here, I live in St. Charles, so that would not work. But whoever that person is that comes in there, they need to be focused on rebuilding that office, and that's going to take a tremendous amount of energy. They can't be campaigning from day one for their next job. They're not going to be making the tough calls. They're going to have different, those two agendas are at cross purposes. So I'd like to see the governor appoint somebody that can really fix this office. And then let's let the citizens of St. Louis pick who they want going forward as their circuit attorney.
All right, Jennifer Joyce, thank you for making time for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Tomorrow, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis visits Peoria, Illinois, Central Illinois, and next week, Illinois wraps up its legislative session. We will continue to cover those and all other political developments between now and when we meet again next Thursday. Until then, we're off the record.